Elvis Presley, I heard his record on a jukebox in Dallas. He's a hillbilly. I said, "Hi, Elvis, I'm Pat Boone. Nice to meet you." He was clearly shy or nervous, so he backed against the wall.
In Hollywood, some stories get repeated so often they become accepted as fact. For more than 60 years, one of those stories has defined the golden age of rock and roll, the tale of two kings. On one side, you had Elvis Presley, the rebel in leather, the snarling, hip-shaking symbol of defiance. On the other, Pat Boone, the clean-cut crooner in a sweater, the safe voice that parents trusted. One was a wildfire, the other was the quiet fireplace. They were sold to the world as total opposites, bitter rivals fighting for the heart of a generation. That's the story we've all been told, but that's not the story Pat Boone tells. Now, at 91 years old, Pat is sharing his memories, and what he has to say isn't about rivalry. It's a story told with a profound honesty that paints a picture of Elvis Presley the world has never really seen. It's about the private talks, the unguarded moments, and the heartfelt memories that reveal the man behind the myth. A man who was shy, deeply spiritual, and painfully human. What Pat Boone remembers doesn't just add to the story of Elvis, it changes it entirely. And what he reveals will change how you see the king forever. One was the clean-cut American idol. The other was the dangerous revolutionary who rewrote the rulebook. For decades, everyone believed they were bitter rivals, two men on opposite sides of a culture war. But that was a story crafted for headlines. The truth, as it often is way more interesting. Pat Boone, at 91, is sharing that truth, and his memories expose a side of Elvis that was hidden from the world, a shy, awkward, and deeply complicated man who was nothing like his public image. And what he remembers will change how you see the king. To really get what Pat Boone is revealing, you have to go back to the mid-1950s. America was a country caught between the old ways and the new. A fresh generation, the first to be called teenagers, was finding its own voice, and that voice was rock and roll. To the establishment, it was just terrifying noise, a raw, primal scream that threatened to crack the quiet surface of American life. They called it the devil's rhythm, a moral panic spinning at 45 RPM. Into this storm walked two young men from Tennessee, who quickly became the symbols of this whole drama. In the eyes of the media, they were perfect rivals. First, there was Pat Boone. He was handsome, polite, and a direct descendant of the pioneer Daniel Boone, which only boosted his wholesome, all-American image. He was a Columbia University graduate, a husband, and a father, even in his youth. His music was a reflection of this. He took the fiery R&B hits of black artists like Fats Domino and Little Richard and re-recorded them with a smoother, orchestral sound that was easier for mainstream white audiences and nervous radio stations to swallow. Pat Boone was safe. And then, there was Elvis. He was the total opposite. He was raw, electric, and radiated a dangerous energy that was intoxicating to teens and horrifying to their parents. Where Boone was polished, Elvis was primal. His hair was greasy, his clothes were flashy, and his stage presence was pure rebellion. The famous sneer and the swiveling hips were a direct challenge to the button-down culture of the time. He didn't water down R&B, he injected its raw power into his own mix of country and gospel, creating a sound that felt like freedom. The media couldn't get enough of it. Headlines screamed about the rivalry. The charts became a battlefield. Throughout 1956 and 1957, they were constantly trading the #1 spot. Boone had huge hits with Love Letters in the Sand, while Elvis ruled with Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog. The story was written, Pat Boone was the clean, Christian family man. Elvis Presley was the delinquent leading a teenage rebellion. It was a narrative pushed by record execs, journalists, and TV hosts because it sold magazines and got ratings. But behind the screaming headlines, a completely different story was taking place, one of quiet meetings, surprising humility, and an unlikely friendship that no one knew about. While the world saw rivals, Pat Boone remembers something else entirely. The year was 1955, at a sock hop in Cleveland hosted by the nation's biggest DJ, Bill Randle. The headliner was Pat Boone. At just 21, Boone was already a star. But he wasn't the only performer that night. As Boone remembers it, Bill Randle met him at the airport with some news. "Bill Randle met me at the airport and said that a new kid would be going on before me," Boone recalled. Boone was curious and asked if it was anyone he knew. Randle's reply was simple: "No, you wouldn't have heard of him. Name's Elvis Presley." Boone vaguely knew the name from jukeboxes in Texas, but he was skeptical that a raw, rockabilly act would go over well with pop fans in Cleveland. Backstage, he finally met this unknown opening act. The man he saw wasn't the swaggering king of rock and roll. In Boone's own words, he was just a scared young kid. The contrast between them couldn't have been more stark. Boone was in his signature button-down and clean white buck shoes. Elvis looked like a rebel. His hair was long, his collar was turned up, and his own white bucks were scuffed and worn. But his tough look was hiding some serious insecurity. When Boone, the headliner, went to shake his hand, Elvis seemed to shrink. Boone tried to be friendly. "Hello, Elvis," he said. "Bill Randle says you're going to be a big star." Elvis didn't respond with confidence. According to Boone, he just mumbled, looked at the floor, and was very ill at ease. Boone tried to encourage him, but Elvis's quiet reply was full of doubt. "I don't know about that, but I hope so." And that was it. Elvis leaned back against the wall, and his friends formed a protective circle around him. Boone was stunned. This guy is hopelessly shy, he thought. How can he possibly perform? This is going to be a disaster. Then, Elvis was introduced. The shy, mumbling kid from backstage vanished. In his place was a bolt of lightning. He tore into "That's All Right, Mama," and the room just exploded. The kids went nuts. They didn't know who he was, but they knew it was something special. Elvis performed his only 2 songs, the crowd screamed for more, and then he was gone. Boone, the headliner, had to go on next. "Thank God I had 2 hit records then, and I was the star that night," Boone recalled, admitting it was the only time he ever shared a stage with Elvis. Of course, a person would have been a fool to go on after Elvis. Years later, when they were both global superstars, Boone asked Elvis about that awkward first meeting. "I said, you know that first night we met in Cleveland, Elvis, you seemed so shy and nervous," Boone remembered. Elvis's confession was shocking in its vulnerability. He said, "Well, I didn't know how to talk to you, man." When Boone asked why, Elvis told him, "You were a star." That was the real beginning of their story. Not as rivals, but as 2 young men from Tennessee, sharing an awkward moment backstage before their lives changed forever. The whole myth of a rivalry just fell apart in private. As their fame grew, Pat and Elvis didn't become enemies. They actually built a quiet, real friendship based on their shared roots and a deep understanding of the pressures of fame. This friendship wasn't for the cameras, it happened in private. Their paths crossed again in Bel Air, California. In the late 50s and early 60s, both were leasing homes just a block from each other while making movies for 20th Century Fox. It was a long way from the concert stages where they were supposedly rivals. Here, they were just 2 guys from Tennessee trying to figure out Hollywood. Boone remembers there were casual dinners and impromptu visits. Elvis, who wasn't married yet, would sometimes just show up at Boone's house on a Sunday afternoon with a couple of his buddies. Boone was already a family man with his wife, Shirley, and their 4 daughters. Elvis, it seems, was drawn to the normal, warm atmosphere of their home. Boone recalls, "He loved being at our house, and when he came over, the girls would get out of the pool and jump all over him, getting him sopping wet. They even played touch football together with other celebrities, a brief escape from the craziness of their lives." This was a brotherhood, not a rivalry. Maybe the most surprising part of their friendship was their shared spiritual curiosity. Boone has always been open about his Christian faith. What the public never saw was that Elvis was on his own deep, and often troubled, spiritual search. Boone says that Elvis was starving spiritually. He missed the simple church services he grew up with. The gospel music he sang with so much passion wasn't just an act, it was a connection to a part of himself he felt he was losing. Pat and his wife, Shirley, hosted Bible studies for people in the entertainment industry, and sometimes, Elvis and Priscilla would attend. In these quiet moments, Elvis felt safe enough to ask the big questions that were on his mind. He'd ask me about faith, Boone remembers, about God, about how I managed to stay grounded. Elvis once told Boone how fame had become a prison. He said, "I wish I could go to church like you do," Boone recounted. When Boone asked why he didn't, Elvis explained, "Oh no, if I go to church, the kids are going to scream for autographs and they're going to distract from the sermon." Elvis's search went beyond just talk. He wanted to meet famous evangelists like Oral Roberts, and Boone made it happen. Boone also shared that Elvis was even thinking about turning his own concerts into a kind of ministry. The most moving proof of this connection came after Elvis's death. At Graceland, among Elvis's favorite records, Boone found a copy of his own album, Pat Boone Reads from the Holy Bible. The idea that Elvis might have listened to his friend read scripture was a powerful testament to their unique friendship. Their last meeting was in July 1977, just a month before Elvis died. Boone and his family were at the Memphis airport, and so was Elvis. The two old friends had a chance to talk. Boone noticed Elvis had gained some weight and playfully smacked him on the stomach, asking, "Are you carrying your money in here or what?" Elvis laughed and said, "Oh, I've been eating too good, boy. I'll sweat it off in Vegas." When Elvis heard Boone was heading to Orlando, he joked, "You're going to Orlando? That's the wrong way, man." Boone shot back with a line that was deeper than it seemed, "It depends on where you're coming from." A month later, Boone was in a barbershop when he heard the news that Elvis was dead. He couldn't believe it. He was only 42, the same age as Boone. That last playful conversation suddenly took on a haunting new meaning. Pat Boone's memories do more than just bust a myth about a rivalry, they give us a rare look into the soul of Elvis Presley. They show a man far more conflicted and vulnerable than the world ever saw. Boone saw the huge gap between the public icon and the private person. The shy kid Boone met in Cleveland in 1955 never really left. That awkwardness was part of Elvis his whole life. His confession to Boone, "I didn't know how to talk to you, you were a star," says so much. Even after he became the most famous man alive, part of him was still that insecure kid from Tennessee. This shyness pushed him deeper into the gilded cage of his fame. Boone watched as Elvis became more and more isolated, trapped in a bubble mostly built by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. He couldn't just go to a movie, he had to rent out the whole theater after midnight. This isolation only made his inner struggles worse. As Boone pointed out, "I think if Elvis had allowed himself to have a more normal life, he would be alive today. He lived in hiding. He was trapped by his own image." This conflict was most obvious in his spiritual life. The man who sang "Hound Dog" was the same man who would stay up all night singing gospel hymns. This wasn't a contradiction, it was the heart of his struggle. He was spiritually hungry, looking for the faith he grew up with. His dream of turning his shows into a ministry was the cry of a soul searching for meaning. Boone's view is so powerful because he was so different from Elvis, but he had deep compassion for him. Boone was grounded by his faith and family, the very anchors Elvis was searching for. He saw a man fighting the same pressures of fame but without the same support system. He saw a man who wanted a family and a normal life, but whose career made him a prisoner from some of the things that he most wanted. Boone also believes that the early death of Elvis's mother, Gladys, was a wound that never healed. He remained, by his own confession, "Mama's boy," Boone said. When she died so early, it tore him up. Through Boone's eyes, we see Elvis not as a caricature of rock and roll excess, but as a sensitive soul dealing with loss, spiritual emptiness, and the crushing weight of being a legend. For decades, the story of Pat Boone and Elvis Presley was simple, a black-and-white tale of rivalry. But now, Pat Boone has given us the real story. He's replaced the myth with something much more real, a story of a complex friendship built on respect, shared struggles, and a surprising spiritual connection. The public saw opposites, but behind the scenes, they were two guys from Tennessee who understood each other in a way the rest of us never could. Boone's memories make us rethink what we thought we knew about Elvis Presley. The rebel on stage was privately a man battling shyness. The icon of excess was secretly a soul searching for God. The king who had everything was a prisoner of his own fame, desperate for a normal life. Boone's memories don't make the legend of Elvis smaller, they make him human. They remind us that behind every icon is a person fighting their own private battles. In sharing these stories, Pat Boone isn't just setting the record straight. He's paying tribute to his friend. There's no bitterness in his voice, just respect and sadness for a life cut short. He wonders if he could have done more. "I wish we had talked more in the later years," Boone has said. "Looking back, I wonder if he was lonelier than we ever knew." This reveals the truth of their relationship. It was never about competition, it was about connection. That final, haunting exchange at the airport, "You're always going the wrong way," is the perfect metaphor for their lives. They took different paths. But for a little while, those paths ran side by side, and in that space grew a friendship the world never saw. But now, thanks to Pat Boone, it will never be forgotten. He's given his friend one last gift, the gift of being truly understood. What do you think of this hidden side of Elvis Presley? Do Pat Boone's memories change how you see the king? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more untold stories from music history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.